Join me tonight on Twitch and YouTube at 11:30 p.m. Eastern at the conclusion of Monday Night Football, where we'll talk about everything that happened in Week 16 of the NFL season. Link to join below. And now, on with our feature presentation. Let's talk Nickelodeon. During the 2020 postseason, the NFL announced that for the first time ever, they were going to simulcast a playoff game, in this case, the Chicago Bears against the New Orleans Saints, on Nickelodeon. I think just about everyone thought that this was going to be an absolute train wreck, and was going to be painful to watch. And I'm sure a lot of people tuned into the broadcast just to see how bad it would be, expecting to tune in for about 5 minutes before going back to the main action on CBS. I was the same way. However, a weird thing happened, because as it turns out, the Nickelodeon broadcast wasn't just better than I thought it would be. It was really good. It was legitimately enjoyable and fun to watch. And then, when they brought it back for the 2021 postseason for the Cowboys-49ers playoff game, it was still a very good broadcast. There are a bunch of broadcasts nowadays that are designed to appeal to families, but most of them just do not work out at all. The experiment that the NBA tried with a Marvel-themed broadcast was an absolute disaster, and was boring and a convoluted mess. The Dude Perfect alternate broadcasts on Thursday Night Football, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner, have been train wrecks, and have been borderline unwatchable. And that's because it is not easy to make a broadcast that appeals to families, because you have to appeal to both kids and adults in some regard, and you have to have some cool graphics that don't detract from the viewing experience, and you have to explain the game in a way that makes sense to kids, but doesn't pander to them and doesn't make them out to be idiots. And yet, in each of the past 2 seasons, Nickelodeon has hit an absolute home run with their alternate broadcast. Even if there were elements that didn't work, there were more elements that did work, and that made the broadcast an enjoyable viewing experience. Which is why I found it a bit weird at first when they announced that this year, the Nickelodeon broadcast would be on Christmas Day, and would be a regular season game. Granted, I'm not even sure you could call this an NFL game, because last time I checked, an NFL game involves 2 NFL teams, and I'm not convinced that the Denver Broncos are an NFL team. But a broadcast like this had its obvious pros and cons. The pro is that the game has significantly less stakes, making it way more enticing to watch than a playoff game, where you actually care about the outcome, and aren't as easily amused by slime cannons. Plus, it gives you a chance to unveil some new Christmas-themed graphics. However, there's an obvious drawback to this that we still will not know the answer to, and that is the fact that the ratings for this game might be an absolute disaster. I don't mean in comparison to the other 2 games, because those were playoff games, so naturally, they'll have higher ratings. I mean just in general, because most people spend Christmas with their family, meaning that convincing the person in charge of the household to have the TV turned on to this game instead of basketball, or a Christmas movie, or one of those music stations that plays Christmas music, or nothing at all, is not going to be easy. And then, if they were going to have this game turned on, to have it turned on to the Nickelodeon broadcast instead of the regular broadcast, especially since the person hosting might not have any kids, and might not have the cable package that gives them Nickelodeon. It's not going to be easy. Basically, despite my concern for what the final ratings number will be, what I'm saying is that if this was an abject failure, it will be a crying shame, because this was the best one yet. Seriously. Once again, the Nickelodeon broadcast, somehow, lived up as one of my most hyped up broadcasts of the year, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Now, were there some problems? Yes, and we'll get to those in a bit, because there were definitely some things that I would change about the broadcast that, in my mind, didn't work as well as they should have. However, those were minor problems, because generally speaking, this broadcast was absolutely superb, was a great way to watch an otherwise horrible game, and was a massive improvement over the last time that they did this broadcast, which was already pretty good. And before I talk specifics about this broadcast, I've reviewed the broadcast in each of its previous 2 installments, so I'll leave a link in the description to both of those if you want to check them out. First, Let's start with the announcing crew, headlined by Noah Eagle and Nate Burleson. I'm not going to dive too much into them and their chemistry, because there's nothing really to add that I didn't say in each of the previous 2 seasons. However, I will say that they were just as good as ever. It is incredibly hard to call a game like this, where you have to provide analysis and talk about what's happening, while at the same time, dumbing it down just enough for the average person who's never watched a game before to understand what you're talking about, but not too much where you assume they're an idiot, while at the same time, integrating a ton of Nickelodeon references and dealing with graphics that have nothing to do with the game. And yet, Noah and Nate did another fantastic job at managing this perfectly. Seriously, it bums me out that we only get to hear Noah and Nate on this broadcast and the occasional NFL Network broadcast. Someone, please, for the love of God, get these 2 in the booth next year for every week. They are so good together. They have a natural chemistry. They're better than just about every crew at Fox and half the crews at CBS. Heck, put them on Thursday Night Football and put Al Michaels out of his misery. However, and this was the biggest pleasant surprise for me, the real star of the booth this year was Gabrielle Green, because this was, without a doubt, her best showing ever. The first year, she seemed extremely shy, having never done this before and knowing nothing about football. The second year, it was the exact opposite, as even though she was way more confident, I felt like it was at the detriment of the broadcast, where she would interject and interrupt at random points and disrupt the flow of the conversation with Noah and Nate. She also tried to talk football and interrupt Nate while doing so, and do some play-by-play and interrupt Noah, even though that's not her role on the broadcast, and never was her role. But this year, she was fantastic. This was the perfect balance. These 3 broadcasts with her have felt like Goldilocks. The first one was too little, the second one was too much, but this one was just right. She didn't interrupt or step on anyone, and she offered her personality with a fair amount of humor, and it felt like she wasn't trying to dominate the booth and the conversation like last time. Nate and Noah integrated her into the broadcast seamlessly, and vice versa. Seriously, this was an unbelievable job and an unbelievable improvement on the part of Gabrielle. I'm really happy for her. And considering that my biggest concern about the broadcast from last year going into this year was her, the fact that she is now a strength and blends in perfectly was a great Christmas gift. That's the good news when it comes to the broadcasters. Unfortunately, I have to address the elephant in the room when it comes to the on-air talent. And before I do, I want to emphasize that I am in no way trying to bash her, and in no way am I trying to tear her down. Remember, these are children that we're talking about here. Just to be in a position to be on the air in front of millions of people in a live segment where anything can happen takes immense guts. She's only 13 years old. There's a major difference with how I criticize a grown adult announcer who should know better, like Mike Goldberg or Reggie Rucker, versus a 13-year-old kid. So keep all of that in mind. Having said that, I don't know why young Dylan didn't do the sideline reporting like last time. Because man, Dylan Schefter just did not work at all. The interviews were awkward. Her reads were very stilted and stiff with not a lot of energy. And there was an obvious point at the end of the first half where she was clearly flustered and was fumbling over her words a ton. Young Dylan was the highlight of last year's show. His reads were energetic. He had a natural rapport with the players, and he was just being himself. Dylan Schefter, on the other hand, just felt like she was focusing so much on not wanting to mess up and wanting to be like her dad that the nerves showed and were extremely apparent on the broadcast. Again, I don't want to rag on a 13-year-old kid, because just being able to do that at 13 is remarkable in itself. But the next time they do this broadcast, they should bring young Dylan back, because it was like night and day. And where the sideline reporting was a strength last year, it was arguably the broadcast's biggest weakness this year. Having said that, they made one big addition to the broadcasting team this year to spice things up. And I truly love that Nickelodeon likes to find ways to innovate, and they don't just rest on their laurels. Because this year, they added live from Bikini Bottom, Patrick Star. And I don't mean pre-recorded segments that they tried to pass off as live. I mean the actual voice actor of Patrick, Bill Fagerbakke, who was talking live during the game with a 3D version of Patrick having his mouth synced up in real time to whatever Bill was saying, which is extremely impressive, both from a technological standpoint and from the fact that Bill had to talk about the game in character. This gave us, without a doubt, the highlight of the broadcast and one of the funniest moments of the entire season, when Patrick was commentating and roasting a Russell Wilson interception. As for the integration of this, even though it looked very uncanny valley at times, I thought it was a good idea and a good concept, but the execution was a bit shaky in two ways. Number one, they stayed on the Patrick conversations for way too long. I'm not talking about a few plays in a row. I'm talking about having him in the booth for half a quarter consecutively, and during multiple instances in this game. Maybe have more segments that go on for less time, where you ask a question or two as a cut into Bikini Bottom, and do that every 20 minutes or so, instead of this one, where it was just some giant extended interviews. It was a bit too much for me. But number two, and perhaps the big one, the placement of Patrick was just all wrong. There's no reason why Patrick should have taken up actual space on camera one showing the game, because on certain plays, you couldn't see the running back in the backfield or the kicker, because Patrick was blocking the shot. Was there any reason you couldn't just move Patrick entirely in that green bar on the side? It's an easy fix. Just move Patrick over to the left a bit more so that he's not blocking the game. Truly a bizarre decision, especially if you were going to have prolonged shots of Patrick like you did here. Now as for the graphics, one of my complaints last year was that they felt like a display of everything they could do, and they tried to do way too much and empty everything out, even when it was distracting. This year, the balance was much better, and the graphics were amplified tremendously. The constant Nickelodeon blimp shots last year, where the blimp would just dump slime onto the field what felt like every single drive, were finally gone. And the graphics this year were extremely varied and fun. There wasn't a whole lot of repetition. The slime cannons were as good as ever, though I'm not sure that the snow cannons looked like snow. Santa just running on the field away from the place somehow worked, even though it shouldn't have by all accounts. And the Yeti was fantastic, just causing mayhem throughout the entire game, but doing it in a way that was fun, and not during the action on the field. Him dumping snow on the fans and hanging out on the goalpost was a nice addition, and was perhaps the biggest way that playing this game on Christmas worked to the broadcast's advantage this year. And when I say that they got really creative with the graphics this year, instead of just doing graphic overkill on things we had already seen before like last year, I mean they got really creative. My favorite one by far was when a claw picked up Baker Mayfield and removed him from the stadium. That was absolutely hysterical. And I think Nickelodeon had a ton of freedom to go wild this year, as long as it didn't interfere with the action, since it was a game between two teams with nothing to play for. So the stakes were extremely low. Having those graphics be a substitute for the influx of player info cards, where players reveal their favorite Nickelodeon show and favorite food, where that information was just showed on some tiny graphics above the scoreboard this time, was a nice change of pace. Hopefully, the next time they do this broadcast, if it's not on Christmas, they can come up with something creative like the Yeti and the snowballs, because this was really well done, and was extremely fun, while not being distracting to the on-field action. But when it comes to the production, I still genuinely don't get the decision to double down on the field goals, where all the shots were shown from a sideline angle, and not an end zone angle or a reverse angle. You can't tell whether or not the ball went in from that angle. No one likes watching a football game like that, especially since you're judging it based on whether SpongeBob's face or Patrick's face smile. But half the time, it didn't even work, and when it did, it got blocked by the slime cannons. Just do this from a reverse angle or an end zone angle. If you can have a Yeti and Santa Claus on the field and moving around without interfering with the players, you can absolutely superimpose some graphics on the goalpost without showing it from the angle of camera 1. And then, just cut to the slime cannon straight after. However, all of my complaints, for the most part, were pretty minor in the grand scheme of things. Because when all was said and done, once again, this Nickelodeon broadcast was extremely fun, extremely innovative, and accomplished what it was set out to do. This was the best one yet. Even though I am by no means the target audience, I enjoyed it, and I can definitely see how kids and families would like this as well. For 3 straight years now, Nickelodeon has gone bigger and bigger and bigger with this alternate broadcast that by all accounts should not work. And for the most part, every gamble they've taken either has its positives or works incredibly well to the point where it's hard to imagine a Nickelodeon broadcast without it. The broadcasting in general was improved. The production in general was improved. And even though the on-field product with this game absolutely stunk, the broadcast itself did not. Because once again, this broadcast was a sweet, sweet, sweet victory for Nickelodeon and for viewers across the country. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, and subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL Trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at Jaguar Gator 9. To see college football videos, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. So you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.